Hey guys, this is gonna be a very special video, and if you haven't known already, I really love Zelda games, and today in this video I'm gonna be just reviewing another sort of spin-off Zelda game, but still connects to the main story, called Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. This game was made by Nintendo. It retails for $60, and it is a very fun game. Just like the last video on Breath of the Wild, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on this game, and mainly touching on the story a lot in this game, especially since there was a lot more story content that we got. And later in the video, I'll be touching on the gameplay and everything. But with all that out of the way, this intro out of the way, let's get started on my Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity Zelda review. So I'm sure when you play any sort of game and you play as a character, you're probably expecting them to go in with their sword blazing, with just a blank slate of a character, as you could see here. And I have to say how Age of Calamity does a great job with making Link seem like an actual character with thoughts and feelings towards certain aspects of his personality. For example, he wants to be a knight, so he trains and devotes all his time to becoming the knight and fulfilling his duty of protecting Princess Zelda from the Calamity until she is able to harness her power and use it to fight back against Ganon. This is something that is very, very fun to see in terms of Link's character development. There's a lot of cutscenes where Link is there and he just seems to show that he cares about being a knight so much that he basically he risk his life like all the time in this game, and it's something that is very fun to see how Link doesn't seem like just a blank slate of a character as he is in most of the games. I know that in Breath of the Wild it touched on aspects on this, but Age of Calamity just seems to Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity just seems to bring it all together even more, and it's just something that is very fun to see, especially with all the characters and everything. They do share their perspectives even more in this game, because this game is more on story content than ever. I mean, it has like a 2 hour long story cutscene thing, and not to say that it's too long, but it is a lot of story content that you get, and you could see these characters develop throughout the story from when Zelda first asked the Guardians, or like the pilots of the Guardians to join with Hyrule, to the part where they're all fighting together for their lives against the Age of Calamity thing. And it's just very fun to see that happen in this game. I was very excited to see that this was coming because of all that extra story content. Like recently, I got my Switch, I really wanted to play the Zelda game, so I wanted to experience that story because I heard it was very good. So seeing that story, I became obsessed with like different story like ideas and theories and stuff. So I wanted to know more and see what would happen next. And this game basically redefines everything that we knew to be true in Breath of the Wild. It basically redefines it, making it a lot more like a different time period or timeline. Like, this game at the end of the day is a game where everything that should have happened in Breath of the Wild seems to have gone away, and it's very cool to see that happen, and how the characters now have their own stories and everything shared. I already talked about that, but it is very cool to see that happen, especially since the new little egg guardian seems to help them determine. It seems to be him determining like what happens in the story in terms of his help and assistance in the story, because basically they would have fallen straight into a Breath of the Wild situation where the Calamity won if it wasn't for the egg guardian. And because of this, it looked like they had a fighting chance against Calamity, which we see in Age of Calamity Hyrule Warriors. And this is something that I touched on in my impressions video of this game, but it really is something that is really good to see on how the connection Zelda has with the little robot. It's very fun to see that happen and take place, and how she starts to remember everything that the robot's done for her and stuff that it used to do for her when she was little and everything. And then how it helps now and what it does later in the game, spoiler alert, it summons back a bunch of the characters from Breath of the Wild. The people that you saw it from the past in like old memories and stuff brought back to the future, and they're all grown up and everything. And then the egg robot brought all them back to the past to help the pilots and the princess and Link to help fight against the Calamity, something that they all have the same like eagerness to do in terms of fighting against the Calamity. And this is something that is very cool to see because it's like a whole reunion between, like, for example, Mipha, who is the princess of the Zora, and Sidon, who became the prince of the Zora, meeting together. Mipha's little brother was Sidon, and that it was just cool to see the reunion. And with Sidon being much bigger, she seems to respect Sidon for what he became as he got older in the Zora Kingdom. So I've talked a little bit about the story content, and I'm going to be talking about it more in depth later in this video, but I want to just get out of the way the gameplay first and then talk about more of the story content, because the story content is more in depth than gameplay wise. So I'm just going to quickly talk about the gameplay, and the one complaint I have about the gameplay in this game that I really thought was bad for the game and how it runs. So the way Warriors gameplay works out is you basically fight, you're one person, you're fighting a bunch of enemies, and you're basically slaughtering them by the dozen, and this can have its advantages and disadvantages. When you play a Hyrule Warriors or any other Warriors games, it can become a little bit of a problem because you get confused with all the stuff on the screen, and you just need to see, you lose track of the main objective in this game. And that has happened with me sometimes where I'll be going somewhere and thinking that was the main objective, and then like fighting a bunch of enemies and then realizing that the objective I'm supposed to be going to is somewhere else on the map, on the other side of the map. And this is something that is pretty much that doesn't happen recurringly throughout the game, but it can happen to you at least once or twice. And because it marks it on the map, so you should see where you're going, but you could just get sidetracked if you're not looking at the map. And this is something that was a little bit of a worry for me about this game, about how it would run. And then with all these monsters and everything coming at you, the frame rate drops terribly to a very low point, and I don't know. It just looks horrible when that happens. When the frame rate does drop, it like you see your character moving at like 30 or like 15. It just drops to a certain amount of FPS, and it's just weird, and it's just something that I don't really think is like as important in terms of a complaint, but it is something that does happen in the game, and it can get a little annoying sometimes because you won't see where your character is going. So like I know that other games like move at like 30 FPS, but this one, it seems to go down to like 15, 20, somewhere around there, that margin, and it's just something that can affect the way you play the game. Not a giant big deal, but it does happen, and you will see it. I'm sure you will see it on your Switch. If you do play this game, you will notice it. So it's just something that happens, and the benefits to having warrior style gameplay is that you get to the benefits is that you seem to move a lot faster than you would anywhere else. And because you move a lot faster, you're able to you're able to go to places quicker because there's more terrain, there's bigger maps, so you have to move fast. When you do move fast, you're able to do special attacks like I believe if you click Y or the button Y or something like that, Link does this like shield surf attack, and it's pretty cool. You could take out enemies, and you might be even moving faster. So it's just something cool to see happen in this game, and the way that it happens with basically every character in the game. but I did like the Link one the most because of his shield surfing ability. It just seemed cool, and you could beat enemies as you're doing it, so it was very fun. I liked using Link the most. And then at one point in this game, as you play, you get to fight different enemies, different bosses. Now, bosses are some things I like in games, which I do like a lot. But in terms of actual good bosses, this game is pretty much lacking. It's nothing new. That's the certain amount of the problem. And Nintendo, I guess it was a little bit of a cheap way to make different bosses. Well, maybe not cheap, but to make them a little harder instead of there being new creatures. Like, for example, you have your standard like stone bosses, but then later in the game you'll have ones that are that have malice, which is like an evil force on them, making them much stronger, much more powerful. And this is something that is very, very weird about the game. But it is like, I guess it is kind of like a Captain Toad Treasure Tracker situation where the bosses were the same, but they got a little harder each time. So it was just they were fun bosses, but there in terms of variety on how they look, like basically the cosmetics of them, it was not that different. Like they do have like different types of moblins, which I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but there's just some type of like moblin creature, something like that is able to have different forms, like different powers and abilities. Like there's an ice one, fire one, there is an electricity one, and I believe there's also a malice infused one. And they're fun to fight, I guess, but they don't really do that much to the gameplay as in terms of their fighting styles. They basically do the same thing, just with a different ability attached to it. So maybe every once in a while you'll get hit with electricity or ice or fire, and it's just not that. In terms of variety of the bosses, it's not that good. And they take a long time to complete as well. I noticed as I was playing the game that they were taking a long time for me to beat because either I did not have a special attack ready, which the button for that would be A when it's charged up, or they just took long to beat, especially when you fight enemies. They have a weak spot to them, and when you cannot access that weak spot, that you are basically just hitting them, and their HP health is going down very little bit as you're hitting them. You'll take them down eventually, and this is most notable with Lynels. These are another set of monsters in the game, but nothing new that you haven't seen in other games like Breath of the Wild. So you have to like chip away at their health until they're down. But if you get their weak spots and you hit them until their weak spot is open, you can inflict some real damage on them. But that happens very rarely, and most of the time you can't really do that. Like I believe there was a part where there was a stone talus and it was on fire, and to get its weak spot you had to jump on it, but the fire would burn you, so you had to get off. So that's why I noticed it the most. And I did kind of like this because it did provide a little bit more challenge to the gameplay. Like I said, harder bosses in the end, but they're still the same type of boss. So it's just very weird to like see that the bosses are that you can take them down at a weak point, but then you can only chip away at their health the rest of the time until they open that weak point. So it's not a big complaint or anything. It's just something that I noticed that you can't really say like you can't really get their weak spot all the time, only when they're open to get it. But that is good because you can get strategy points for that. Like you can have a strategy in your head, like how am I gonna be like this enemy, or how am I gonna be this boss. And it is fun to plan out like a strategy for it, and to how you're gonna fight them and get their weak spots. Like certain bosses require you to stay away for a little bit, and then once they're open or once they're not attacking, you can go in and inflict some damage on them. This is something that is very fun about the gameplay, especially when it comes to bosses. Now I know I said that bosses in terms of variety are not as big as bosses that you would see in a normal game, but you do have to use strategy in order to beat them. They are not like, even Breath of the Wild, you had to use strategy to beat these bosses. There were different attacks you had to use, and it seems to like drive through it to this game too, because you can't just slice and dice all the time with your sword or anything. You have to stand back sometimes and wait till they're open to inflict damage. And this is something that is very fun about the game. Something I really enjoyed about it was this aspect of it, that sense of strategy, and that your moves matter. And then if you fail, you have to basically start that whole section again, and you don't want that. So you have to plan out your strategy as whoever character you are. And I will admit, some characters are a little bit more fun to play as than others. I really liked personally to play as like people like Link or Urbosa or Sidon, because they all had like swords, and I really liked like the sword. People with the swords moved a lot quicker until you get to the sort of end of the game, and then Zelda's powers, spoiler alert, they awaken, and you get to use her light powers, and it's just, she could basically be anything at that point, and it's just very cool to see that happen, especially when you're talking about Zelda in and the conflict with her reaching her powers from the last game over to this one. And you could see that the change in how she's more confident in what was already predetermined in Breath of the Wild, that she would struggle to unlock her powers. She seemed more confident when she had her powers that they were going to be able to beat the Calamity. And this is something that was very cool in terms of the story, that character development from game to game, and it was just very fun to see that happen. They do have some actual fighting moments in the game. Not every cutscene is a special story moment, but there's always something new there's always something new. Like, it's not all the time fighting, but there are some heartfelt moments that are in this game with the cutscenes that you wouldn't expect from a actual a Zelda game, unless you're talking about like really deep story details. You wouldn't really see that in a Zelda game. And it's something that is very fun to see happen, especially with the new animation for it. It's cool to see how the new animations from Breath of the Wild carried over to here, and you could see that, and it's just very cool to see that happen. And with the story, I already talked about, you see Link's development, but also you see the development of Zelda's relationship with Link, and Link's relationship with Zelda and all the other pilots of the Guardians. You see them becoming friends as towards the end of the game, and this is all part of the character development, that story arc for the characters when they have this giant change, or the way they handle certain situations is different because of something that happened, or someone else encouraging someone else. Like, I remember there was one part where Urbosa, who is the chief of the Gerudos, was talking to Zelda and inspiring her that she'll unlock her powers one day. And this is something that was very fun to see in the game, along with the fact that this game was supposed to highlight that story content and give up not just the gameplay, but the story content was basically everything with that. And one more gameplay thing before I continue, the way that they made the gameplay connect with the story in terms of a Warriors game was pretty cool. I believe I touched on this in my Hyrule Warriors discussion. Go check that out if you want to hear my initial thoughts of it. And my thoughts were basically that this made sense, and that Warrior style gameplay is what this game needed to do well, and it was what it needed to basically solidify a certain amount of the feel of how it felt to be these characters in an actual war that took place, with different enemies coming at you with every different type of enemy. And you see this through the massive amounts of enemies that you fight in this game. And also, it is very fun to fight these enemies. I already talked about it. and the gameplay section and everything. So it was just very fun to see that happen in this game, especially since when you're fighting, it doesn't seem to get old or anything. It might get a little repetitive, but most of the time it doesn't get like, you don't feel like so like it's happening over and over again. The monsters just keep coming. But that does show more the complexion of the warrior style gameplay. I mean, the war was a bunch of monsters keep coming at you with everything they have because of the Calamity, who came to destroy everything, and making sure that the heroes stay down was their goal. And this is in a way, it might seem annoying at first, but when you think about it, it works so perfectly with the type of game you're playing as, with a warrior style gameplay. And it was very fun to see how it connects to the main story and what actually took place during that time. And this is something that I very much like about the game, and I really hope that if you definitely should play Breath of the Wild before you play Age of Calamity, because you want that extra story content. But not for nothing, even if the Hyrule Warriors basically did not made Breath of the Wild not happen, mostly it was, you really should play it over again, because even by itself it just shows, it adds to the complexion of the story. As you see Zelda trying to access her powers, and what they go through, what the whole Hyrule Kingdom goes through, if it's like two different ways. So like, if this is what Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is, what Hyrule would have went through if it was winning, and then Breath of the Wild is what would happen 100 years after the Calamity has won. And this is something that is very fun to see, so I really suggest playing Breath of the Wild, and maybe even watching my Breath of the Wild review video that I made on this channel a while ago on Breath of the Wild, so then you might be able to be caught up with everything, and then you won't have to really play the games in order to understand what I'm talking about here in this video. One of the best things about this game, and something that I really, really liked, was how they ended it. Now, I'm not going to go into major spoilers, because I know there might be some people that have not played the game. But, I mean, I guess I do have to go in depth, so I guess this is my spoiler alert part. So, in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, Zelda unlocks her power, and she becomes like this, almost like this, like the powerfulest character in the game. I'm telling you, there's going to be a point where you're not going to want to play as Link anymore, and you're just going to play as Zelda because of her powers and how strong she really is because of it. And this is something that is very fun about the game, to see how a character became from just using the Shelik Slate or Sheikah Slate to attack, like you could see right here, like how they use the Sheikah Slate, to now when she is able to fight on her own. She doesn't need any other sort of power or like access to power in order to fight back and help fight against the Calamity. And this is something that is very fun to see in a Zelda game, that the development of characters, and this is something that was never really touched on so much in Zelda games. I mean, yes, they had development in characters and everything, but they never really touched on it so much that it was like this, that you could see all this character development with all the characters, not just spanning Zelda and Link. And this is something that I really think should be implemented into all other Zelda games that come after it. Maybe not as in terms of how much cutscenes there are, because because Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity touched more on story, but I'm talking about everything else that it said, that like in Breath of the Wild, the cutscenes, that type of stuff should be implemented in other games like Breath of the Wild, and it would just be really, really cool to see Nintendo do this. And I don't really know if they're gonna reveal Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, but that would be something amazing to see. And getting more story content after we just got this would be pretty cool. Maybe for Zelda's 35th anniversary, we get a full look at Breath of the Wild 2. I'm not saying that's the case, but we might, maybe, I don't know. Nintendo surprises the fans of Nintendo every once in a while, and maybe we might even get a little bit of DLC for Hyrule Warriors. Maybe it might just be some extra characters, but it might still be, might be a little bit more story content to build off of Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. And if that's the case, then I am going to enjoy seeing that DLC content and everything else come together, and it would just be really cool. Especially if you like stories, I really recommend the Zelda series as a whole. You want to play a really in-depth story, maybe not as in-depth as like stuff like Persona 5 or anything like that, because those are really, really in-depth and really long. But you want to play a simple story game, but a good, simple story game, I really suggest Legend of Zelda, the series as a whole. I really hope that if you ever do play a Zelda game, that you will see the story developing as I did from Breath of the Wild to Age of Calamity. Age of Calamity was an amazing game. I really hope that if anyone who plays it, that they would see the story and see what I'm seeing with the development of the characters and everything. It is really fun to see this happen in a Zelda game, especially considering all the character development along with development from Breath of the Wild to Age of Calamity. It's just very fun to see that happen. The gameplay is not the best. There are other games that are better than it in terms of warrior style gameplay, the frame rate, but it is still something that is very cool to see. Also, just a little quick of a side note, I'm going to be doing Animal Crossing New Horizons review. This is the thumbnail for it. It's going to be coming soon to my channel. This is pretty much going to be after this video is over. And I really hope that you guys would enjoy Age of Calamity when you play it. Tell me your thoughts of Age of Calamity in the comments if you want to. Or give me feedback on this video or any of my other videos. And with that, guys, this is Jay from J02 Reviews. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.